Hello, Molweni, Sanu, Hujambo, I'm Tembekile Mkhototo, and this is Unwrap Africa, where every Sunday we focus on the latest news, trends, and successes of the African continent. Siyaqaqa. Coming up tonight, South Sudan's President Salva Kiir sacks 2 senior aides following the appointment of a dead man to serve on a panel to lead discussions on elections that will be held in December this year. And then we chat to the UN's Vivian Perre on peace efforts in the DRC. South Africa announcing in the last few hours that it's pulling out of the MONUSCO deployment in the east of that country. Question tonight, what do you make of a family's demand for compensation after the South Sudanese president issued a decree appointing a dead relative to a committee for elections preparations? You can send us your thoughts on Facebook. We're SABC Unwrap Africa. Alternatively, find us on X, where our handle is SABC News_TV. Let's have a look now at the main stories from the African continent this week. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa has told United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres that the country will withdraw its contribution of soldiers to the UN stabilization mission in the Democratic Republic of Congo. South Africa ranks among the top 10 troop contributing countries to MONUSCO, with more than 700 soldiers deployed in the DRC. South Africa has also taken a major step in the fight against HIV, with the first group of HIV-negative volunteers enrolled in a groundbreaking vaccine trial. The so-called Brilliant 011 study could mark a turning point in efforts to fight HIV. In Nigeria, President Bola Tinubu has deployed an army battalion to Kwara State. It's after gunmen there killed as many as 162 people in one of the country's deadliest attacks in recent months. Also tonight, more than 50,000 people have been evacuated from their homes in northern Morocco following heavy rains. The evacuations began on Friday.
It means to the patients that are in the location where there will be no supply that at what point, if nothing is done.
Medical charity Médecins Sans Frontières, or Doctors Without Borders, has cautioned it could soon stop delivering critical care to remote parts of South Sudan. Shortages of medical supplies are putting services at risk for thousands of vulnerable people. In Kenya, the central bank has warned that using banknotes to create floral-style bouquets is illegal, and it could lead to a prison sentence for the people who break the law. The trend involves rolling and then pinning cash into decorative arrangements for celebrations, as you can see right now. Well, it's a peculiar story. South Sudan's President Salva Kiir firing 2 senior aides in recent days after a situation where the president basically appointed a dead man to serve on a panel to lead discussions on elections that will be held in December this year. The SABC's Patrick Oyet sums it all up for us.
Stewart Soroba Budia's appointment was announced in a presidential order on January 30th. However, local media pointed out that Mr. Budia, a member of the opposition United Democratic Party, UDP, had died 5 years ago. It led to people mocking the appointment on social media. The president's press secretary then said the office had relied entirely on the names submitted by stakeholders for inclusion on the panel. Thereafter, an official statement said the president had sacked his press secretary and the chief administrator. Mr. Budia was a signatory to a peace agreement signed in 2018 to end 5 years of conflict in South Sudan. President Kiir has set up a panel made up of representatives from different parties to pave the way for elections. The polls dictated by the peace accord are now set for December 2026, but there is currently fighting in the northeastern part of the country in Jonglei State bordering Ethiopia. The UN says more than 180,000 people are believed to have been forced to flee their homes by the recent fighting. President Kiir's army is battling forces aligned to South Sudan's suspended Vice President Riek Machar. Mr. Machar is currently under house arrest and on trial for murder, treason, and crimes against humanity. He and his party deny the charges. President Kiir hopes the panel he set up for the dialogue, where the late Mr. Budia was appointed, will find a way to move the 2018 peace process forward. Patrick Oyet, SABC, Juba, South Sudan.
And our question to you this evening is linked to Patrick's report, and we want to know what you make of a family's demand for compensation from the South Sudanese government after the president issued that decree appointing their dead family member to a committee for election preparations. Are they entitled to any money? Let's see what you've got to say. One here says that the whole country is a mess to begin with. A dead person? Swearing Goma says Africa is a movie. The Duke of Kanyanda says, make it make sense. And Jean-Baptiste Serugo says the blunder in South Sudan appointing a dead man to a committee led to swift sackings. Reminds me of Tshisekedi, quote, promoting a deceased DRC army officer in 2022, but no heads rolled for that mix-up. Levels of accountability indeed. Nelson O'King says, I said it before and I'll say it again. President Kiir is the threat to South Sudan's security and development. He needs to go, according to Nelson. That's how it's looking in terms of your responses to that somewhat bizarre story that's coming out of South Sudan. We'll look at more of your responses later if we've got time, but much more coming up for you, including the situation in the eastern DRC. South Africa confirming it's pulling out of the MONUSCO deployment there. What will the implications of that decision be? Stay with us. You're watching Unwrap Africa on SABC News, and South Africa's International Relations and Cooperation Minister Ronald Lamola has emphasized the need for the African Union to do more to resolve conflicts on the continent. Lamola has called on member states to honor their obligations to the United Nations as well. The call comes after the UN chief Antonio Guterres warned that the world body is in financial trouble with countries not honoring their obligations. SABC special correspondent Sophie Mugwena spoke to Minister Lamola ahead of the AU heads of state and government summit that will be held in Addis Ababa, that's in Ethiopia.
We are looking forward to a great year, continuing to strengthen and affirm the role of multilateral platforms. As you are aware, we are chairing SADC as an interim chair, so it will be to help the process of constitutional transition in Madagascar, and also peacekeeping missions across the continent, including to continue to be seized with the matter of the Eastern DRC. As you are aware, displacements continue. So SADC has to continue to look into this issue, but also issues of regional integration, which becomes key. SADC trade and integration is at less than 21%. So we need to look forward to work with my counterparts, and including Minister Dow, Trade, and his counterparts in the region, to build on that regional integration, to be able to build trade, to build economies for the region, so that we are able to create jobs in all parts of the SADC region, but also for the economy of SADC to grow, including issues of climate change. You have seen what is happening in Mozambique and many parts of the SADC region. So those are also issues of prime importance that SADC will continue to look into. And as you are aware, next week is the African Union, the Executive Council, which will be followed by the summit on Saturday 14 and 15. But prior to that is the meeting of officials and the Executive Council that will be looking into various issues of the continent, including the reform agenda of the AU itself, its structure, how it should be efficient and function, but also to look into all issues of the continent on peace, issues of Sudan. As you are aware, the biggest humanitarian crisis that the continent is facing. But also South Africa is the chairperson of the C5, responsible to take South Sudan to ensure that the revitalized peace agreement in South Sudan is implemented. And this is a big year for South Sudan because it's a year where they are supposed to go to elections by December 2025. So South Africa will be seized with that, will be reporting to the Committee of Five of the African Union how far we are going. The revitalized peace agreement is fragile with serious challenges in South Sudan. And it's a matter that we are really seized with and continue to call all the stakeholders to continue to uphold the contents of the revitalized peace agreement for peace to continue to be given a chance in South Sudan, and to call for all parties and stakeholders to cease any form of hostilities and focus their work on implementation of the revitalized peace agreement. So indeed, our year is going to be a hectic one, but also the UN, as you are aware, is facing huge challenges, budgetary constraints because of the withdrawal of the US of some in most of the institutions of the UN. So it is also a big platform that we need to continue to be seized with so that the UN is able to discharge its mandate as the world's prime multilateral platform. So with all member states, we have to ensure that the UN's existential challenges are resolved and the UN is able to continue to discharge its mandate.
Well, the United Nations has meanwhile welcomed signs of progress at talks aimed at reducing violence in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. Qatar has been facilitating those talks between the Congolese government and the M23 armed group. Earlier this week, the UN announced that it will soon send a peacekeeping mission to the city of Uvira in the eastern DRC. It's meant to closely monitor adherence to the ceasefire that's currently in place in the region. For more on this, we're joined by Vivian from Perre from the UN Organization Stabilization Mission in the DRC. Good to have you on the program, Vivian. So the UN peacekeeping mission in the DRC, as I'm saying, is going to be sending this first team of monitors, if you will, to have a look at how the ceasefire in the eastern DRC is progressing. What exactly will this monitoring work entail and how will it be carried out?
Thank you for the question and good morning. Thanks for having me on your program. So as you pointed out, in Qatar, an agreement was signed between the government of DRC and the M23 to have a credible ceasefire. And our role would be to, in the context of the EVGM+, which is a monitoring mechanism that falls under the ICGLR, the International Conference of the Great Lakes, and with representation from all their member states, to engage in ceasefire monitoring. Now, ceasefire monitoring is about concretely verifying compliance with the agreed ceasefire arrangements, and to do this in a structured and credible way. So in practical terms, that means we would go on the ground, receive and lodge allegations, and establish facts through agreed verification procedures, to engage the parties to de-escalate incidents, and to report those findings through the established mechanisms. So MONUSCO's mandate is MONUSCO's contribution is mandate-based. We were, first of all, assigned this role by the Security Council. And secondly, we participate through the EVGM of the ICGLR. And we support this mechanism by participating in it ourselves, but also through coordination, liaison, technical and logistical enablers. And we will also participate in the verification activities, as will the parties to the ceasefire. So the government of DRC is in it, and M23 is also in it. How
successful would you say the ceasefire has been? I know it hasn't been in place that long, but is it really working? Because there have been reports of fighting, more violence, even if it's pockets of what we saw in the earlier parts, let's say, of 2025. Unfortunately, the fighting has not stopped. So there's violations. Both sides are accusing each other. And this is precisely why we needed a ceasefire verification mechanism, so we can investigate such violations and report on them. But in order to deploy this mission, we first need a credible ceasefire. So I thank the Qataris for working on that. Now we need international pressure from all countries, internationally and in the region,
to actually make the parties comply with this ceasefire so that we can start the monitoring. On our side, MONUSCO is ready to deploy, but there are certain conditions that need to be met that make it safe to engage in this ceasefire monitoring.
As you say, there have been these discussions between the M23 fighters as well as the government led by President Tshisekedi in Qatar. There was also a meeting between President Tshisekedi and Rwanda's leader, Paul Kagame, who his country has been said to be largely supporting and perhaps even allegedly arming the M23. They met in Washington with President Trump. There were commitments made there as well. Why have all of these efforts not been as successful as it would have been hoped?
First of all, this is a very old, very complex conflict which has international dimensions, local dimensions, regional dimensions, so it's really complex. Many attempts have been made to bring peace to the eastern DRC. So we're very grateful that this process was once again restarted with a big push from the President Trump in the US, and then taken up by Qatar, who involved the M23 directly. And I must add to that, the African Union has also a mechanism under the mediation of the president of Togo, Faure Gnassingbé, who have 5 ex-presidents from the continent in the mediation team. And they have recently had a summit where they decided they're going to really bring all these processes together. So all of these processes are very useful. They all address part of the problem. And the African Union is now really engaged to bring this all together. Because all these efforts, as useful as they are, need to be pulling in the same direction and fully coordinated. And MONUSCO supports all these different mediations and processes and stands ready to, as always, play its role.
What then would you say, Vivian, is the greatest challenge to these efforts to silence the guns in eastern DRC?
The fighting needs to stop to be able to give all these processes a chance to succeed. That's really the first step. So we're on our way with this latest agreement in Qatar, where the parties do not hold a real credible ceasefire. It's going to be very challenging. And as I mentioned, also for our freedom of movement, to be able to move around safely. So the fighting needs to stop. Then a ceasefire is really a holding situation while then the peace processes can play out further. There's many root causes that need to be addressed, many regional dimensions that need to be addressed. So ceasefire is only a first step, but first thing to happen is that the fighting needs to stop. And as you mentioned, it still happens in pockets.
So with South Africa announcing in the last 24 hours that it's going to be pulling out of the MONUSCO deployment in the eastern DRC, what implications is that going to have for the dynamics on the ground in eastern DRC?
Yeah, first of all, let me thank South Africa for always having supported MONUSCO and peacekeeping in general. Parts of our troops with a very offensive mandate, the Force Intervention Brigade, have been always carried by South Africa. You have also been here in the context of Summer DRC, the SADC mission to the Congo. So you've played a very, very big role. The Republic of South Africa has informed that it will be withdrawing its troops, which leaves us with some gaps. But we are working currently on plans to fill those gaps. And once again, we want to thank South Africa for its steadfast commitment to UN peacekeeping, and we look forward to continue to engagement with them on broader peacekeeping issues, including, of course, through their participation in the EVGM Plus, that ICGLR mechanism that is going to be monitoring the ceasefire. So we'll continue to work together.
And the presence of MONUSCO, I mean, the soldiers in the country at the moment in the eastern DRC number in their thousands. I think one of the estimates I'd seen towards the end of last year had put it about 11,000. I'm not sure what the latest figures are, but with South Africa pulling out then, quantify that loss for us in numbers. And as you're saying, you're trying to plug those gaps that'll result from South Africa's decision. What will plugging those holes look like for you?
Yes, South Africa is not the only one that we will have to fill the gap for. We have also suffered, as your previous speaker said, from a liquidity crisis in the UN. So recently we've had to pull out many troops, many police and many civilians to be able to keep the UN afloat liquidity-wise. So we are already suffering gaps. At the moment, we have less than 8,000 troops on the ground, even though we're mandated for close to 11,000. So we have many gaps, and we try to fill them with other troops that are willing to come and help this country and help us stabilize and end this conflict, which has taken on way, way, way too long, 30 years. And the people here deserve a better life.
So numbers-wise, Vivian, this monitoring team that's going to be sent into the DRC, how much is that going to bring in? How big a team is it? And how much is it going to bring in terms of resources?
We start small. We have to just get it going first. So we plan to initially use air transportation, helicopters, to go to hotspots that are being called in. But if this ceasefire holds and becomes a proper ceasefire with separation between the parties and demarcation lines that they should not cross, then we are able to have a more stable and long-term monitoring mechanism, and that would require additional resources. So we can get started right now within the resources that we have, but if this is really a long-term ceasefire that gives the opportunity for the mediation processes to play out, and this can take a while, as we know from conflicts around the world. This country would not have been in conflict for 30 years if it wasn't complex. So then we would go to the member states to ask for additional resources. And you get what you pay for. If you give us the resources, we can do more. And if we don't have the resources, we can do less.
Vivian Perre, good to talk to you from the UN Organization Stabilization Mission in the DRC. Thank you for your time on Unwrap Africa.
Thank you.
Well, much more still ahead for you when Unwrap Africa continues. Thanks for choosing Unwrap Africa on SABC News. Well, many of us flock to bustling markets to stock up on spices and other ingredients that remind us of home-cooked meals from our countries of origin. Well, it's no different at the Yeoville market. And this week, our producer, Nonhlanhla Mthembu, went to see what's going on there at an area, well, by the way, affectionately known as the United States of Africa.
The Yeoville market in Johannesburg is where cultures collide and Africa's diversity comes alive.
I would say Yeoville is kind of like a microcosm of the United States of Africa. There is no nation that is found in the continent of Africa that you are not going to find in Yeoville. Where we are now in the market, you find different types of foodstuffs that are coming from Africa. Some of African people are not eating what we eat here in South Africa. So they will be coming from as far as Sandton, as far as Rosebank, as far as Malvern, to just come and buy food here because they know that the food that are produced, or which is the staple from their respective homes, those foodstuffs are found here in Yeoville.
Majesty Miandu says this place is a treasure to Africa because this is where African traditions are kept.
At Wits University, I work as a guest lecturer for the School of Arts, where I teach indigenous knowledge systems, indigenous performance to the students of the media school.
Why do you think it's important for people like you to continuously feed into the younger generation the knowledge about the indigenous lifestyle of Africa?
The honest truth is that indigenous knowledge systems in Africa existed for millions of years.
We are informal traders, we traders, so we don't have deep freezers. So our way of doing things is you smoke it, you dry it, and then you get on the road. So you can move it anywhere in the whole of Africa, but it must be smoked and it must be dried. But this is smoked fish from Zambia.
The Africans that are living in Yeoville are only waiting for the African Union to notice that whatever that they are dreaming about is already happening in a small community. As you can see here, all the trading stalls that are here are owned and operated by people from different African countries.
When the world views Africa, it should view Africa in its diversity, that we are united in our diversity.
That's how we come to the end of another edition of Unwrap Africa here on SABC News. We do hope you've enjoyed this evening's program and found it informative as well. We're back with you 8 p.m. next Sunday. Stay with SABC News. Good night.